Hi all, this is Kurt Cathy, aka Jack X Japan Kurt Explicit. This is a new basically it's a YouTube channel, and I'm gonna start a podcasting series about my life in Japan, about things in general in Japan, and then also I'll cover various topics, also maybe some stuff covering, well, my favorite topic is U.S. politics and how crazy it is right now. But I'll try and stay away from that, not to bore you. I am also a cybersecurity expert professional, and I'm doing a series of basically video blogs related to that on a separate channel. I will share that sometime. Otherwise, you can just search my name on the internet and it should come up. But today, I want to talk about a subject that came up a couple weeks ago on Reddit, and it comes up quite often, and it's related to discrimination in Japan. So anybody that's lived in Japan for a while has faced, especially as a foreigner, has faced some kind of either knowing or unknowing discrimination, and quite often it's racial. And I want to address it because when you address discrimination, you're actually looking at a couple of things. And one thing I see quite often, and I'm not trying to Japan-splain it away and say, okay, well, Japanese don't discriminate, because they do, and they do it unknowingly, and they'll actually argue that they're not discriminating, which is quite frustrating for foreigners. But the flip side of that, though, that we have to be cognizant of is exactly what we see here. And that's basically, we try and impose some of our values, our Western values, on the way that things are in Japan. And we've got to be cognizant of that as well. For example, the thing that came up on Reddit the other day, and I thought it was quite funny, and I'll share, it'll appear in the screen there very small. So you might have to pause and look at it really close to see what the topic is. But it's basically saying that, that they're getting racially profiled. Well, I got news for you here. It's not illegal here to racially profile. In fact, if a legal authority asks you for your permanent resident card, you need to produce it, especially if it's police, if it's law enforcement or immigration. If they ask you for your permanent resident ID, you need to have it on you. You should have it on you at all times. When I walk the dog in the morning, I don't have it on me, but I'm close to home and it's really easy to come and get it. But typically you need to carry your residence card with you. And when a law enforcement official or any official like that asks for it, you need to produce it, and don't give them lip about it either. And to do so is only to your own detriment. So that's one example. That's racial profiling. The other thing is I don't know. There's various things. Police questioning you out of the blue. People walking past the Koban and that kind of thing. That's another form of racial profiling. They question you because you're a foreigner, but deal with it. The other thing is, so that leads us into discrimination. Okay, so they can racial profile, so they're going to discriminate against you. But let's talk about discrimination in general and what's experienced. First of all, as a Caucasian in Japan, you don't get near the discrimination that, for example, a Chinese or even a black person would get, a person of color would get in Japan. And if you don't believe that, next time you go to a bar or something, ask a black person that's lived in Japan a while, and he'll probably have quite a few stories for you. And that leads us to racism and racism in Japan. When we talk about racism, it's quite often, it's very blatant, and it's quite common. But this is the first topic that I want to bring up is this is an example from Reddit. It says Tokyo lawyers to collect info on police stopping foreigners for questioning. Well, I saw this Reddit, and it was based on the Tokyo Bar Association presentation at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Tokyo a couple weeks ago, and I replied basically, good luck with that, because you're not going to get much. If they look into it, what are they going to do? It's not illegal for police to profile foreigners and walk up to them and check their permanent resident card. It's hardly ever happened to me. And and in fact, it's to have a detective walk up and ask me to produce my permanent residence cards. Never happened. I've heard stories of it happening, but it's never happened to me. And I've lived here 22 years. So my suspicion is either the person that was treated that way fit a profile for a crime that the investigator is researching at the time or investigating at the time, or they looked suspicious or they reacted suspicious to a look. That's the only thing I can think of, because I just have never experienced somebody just walking up to me out of the blue and showing their badge and asking for my permanent resident card. But so this kind of thing comes up quite often, either in the R Japan Reddit or R Tokyo Reddit thing, and I just have to say, deal with it. I responded accordingly on Reddit, and I got a retort back saying, well, they said they would look into it. Well, don't hold your breath for action on that. Fine, they can look into it, but it's not illegal to get racially profiled in Japan. Sorry for the loud clicks. I hit that a little hard. So that's, that takes us to the next topic that I wanted to, cover, was in discrimination in Japan. There's age discrimination, and age discrimination is so blatant here. And they do it, they have age discrimination is actually embedded in the policies in companies. The mandatory retirement age is an age discrimination thing. Quite often, even when I was younger, like in my mid 40s, when I would interview for a job, they would always confirm what my birth date was, and that's become even more often recently. I don't necessarily work a regular job. I'm a freelancer, and I get along just fine like that. But quite often, either during a job interview for a project, or when they're reviewing my profile for a project, they will quite often ask that question. So, that's just a thing. You got to deal with it. It is illegal to age discriminate, and there is legislation and regulations around that kicked in the early 90s and late 80s when the Japanese economy bubble burst, but despite that, it's still blatantly out there, and it's too bad. And then the other one is, of course, racial discrimination. I already talked about that. That's in our face. And then there's sex discrimination, and that's all around us. And it's unfortunate because the female population here is 60%. They're so empowered. Generally, females are better workers than the males here. They're actually a lot cleaner. The males are used to, and I'm sorry, Japanese guys, if you don't like this, it's the truth, man. I've worked around Japanese guys, and they keep a dirty desk unless you mandate a clean desk policy. In general, I'm generalizing here, but that's just been my experience. And then there's health discrimination. People with health conditions tend to be ostracized here, especially if they have a physical, they're in a wheelchair or they have to use a walker or something like that. And that's another thing, like age discrimination. It's embedded, in the policies of a company. So with the social health insurance system, the way that it is, it basically, before you become an employee, there's a pre-screening, a health pre-screening that they'll send you to. And that, that's unfortunate because people with ongoing health conditions, for example, diabetes, I imagine that they're discriminated out of work quite often. On any of these things, if you have a reply or an opinion or something you disagree with me on, or something that you want me to clarify, feel free to put comments in the YouTube channel below the video. I'm going to try and live stream these. unfortunately, I couldn't get my Restream account going today, so this is just going to be a video upload. But it's also a good dry run. I'm still trying to knock out the kinks on this whole process. So when we look at discrimination in Japan a little further, there's the there's jil.go.jp. So that's basically it's a website that covers things like this. But in there's a document. There's this document. You can see the link in there, I think. So check it out. It's in English. It was written late, like in 2008 or 2012, somewhere around there. And right around that time, there was a lot of new legislation related to sex discrimination, and there was actually a lot of racial discrimination litigation going on in Japan at that time. But basically, what they outline in the it's a 200-page document. So I went for the core of it, and I basically looked at employment discrimination, and they, it says the typical, an employer shall not engage in discriminatory treatment with respect to, and then it goes into wages, working hours and conditions, same thing as what we hear in the United States. So by reason of nationality, creed, or social status. And there's another down below there in Article 4 at the bottom right hand corner there. They specifically in a separate article address sex discrimination. And yeah, so, and by the way, that sex discrimination thing is another thing that's come up since, like at a certain large advertising agency, people were overworked, specifically females were overworked, harassed, bullied, and committed suicide. So the bereaved families actually sued this major advertising agency, and it's turned into a big deal, and it's caused a lot of other large companies that operate in Japan to really look at harassment and bullying and power harassment within their organizations. But let's get down to brass tacks. So this is, I mentioned that I do a bit of freelance work. So this is a freelance website, and this is a job advertisement, and you can see right here it says up to 40 years of age, or below 40, around 40 years of age. They're saying right there, blatantly, age discrimination. And this one's a real gem. It goes straight to the heart, man. It says, up to 50 years of age, right there. And then it also says no foreigners. So that takes me into the next subject, which is basically racial discrimination and racism in Japan. And, I've had Japanese people that argue and argue and argue, and even like Japanese American friends, it's like, now, because when you say racism in Japan, you're kind of pushing to the fact that race discrimination is institutionalized and it's embedded. And there's a lot to talk on this subject, and, maybe even turn it into a discussion, online discussion forum at a certain point, because I think this topic's going to come back up as it naturally comes back up all the time in Facebook groups and also Reddit. But there's a couple things going off there. So Japanese, and the best impression I heard, or one of the ways that I heard it described, was from a Dutch person that I used to work for when I worked at ING Direct. And he said, basically, Japanese think that they're so special, that they're so unique, that there is no way that somebody can speak their language fluently and understand their culture completely. And to a certain extent, the Japanese that thinks that way is kind of correct. The Japanese language is very difficult, but fluency is achievable. And I have achieved fluency. Yesterday, I was talking with a friend that works at Mitsubishi, and he's fluent, and we read and write fluently, and we do it as a part of business. So that Japanese perspective that they're so unique that that's not achievable. I face that all the time because a lot of people will look at my written Japanese, and I've had cases where I wrote a Japanese announcement email and a Japanese person came to me with a bunch of, corrections, not knowing that my secretary, my Japanese secretary who graduated from a 4-year university, actually wrote the email. And I just read off and approved of it. And it was sent out as an announcement. And I've had that a couple times. And that's racism because the person's thinking that and they think because you wrote it that they can go ahead and make comments about your Japanese, but knowing very little that they're actually commenting on another person's Japanese. So when you look at that and you look at things that are like that, so on the other side, on the culture side and understanding the culture completely and stuff, a general understanding of the culture is quite achievable, but to understand like certain expressions, for example, what does okage-sama de mean? Or doi tashimashite, what does that mean, right? So when you get into like these very old, those are the concept of wabi and sabi. Those are things that you can study and you can understand, but there's, they are things that take years to internalize and understand. So in that sense, yes, there is some uniqueness there. But on the other side, okay, if you look at another view of how racism comes up in Japan, it's many times it's like this, unfortunately. This came up, this was a store in Asakusa, and it came up on Reddit a couple days ago, and basically saying foreign tourists not allowed. Well, to tell you the truth, before the pandemic, there were so many tourists here and tourism was booming. And I'm just so glad the tourists are gone myself. So I kind of feel, kind of feel happy about this when I see signs, but it's also sad in the sense that they have to just single out foreigners. And then this one particularly, addresses coronavirus and COVID, and singles out foreigners for that. And that just completely sucks because the foreigner population in Japan doesn't have any greater of an infection of coronavirus or COVID than other parts of Japan or other populations in Japan. This one is, the sad part is like we hate foreign tourists. Well, so do I. But I hate is a little bit of a strong word. But if you read this really close, they say throughout the history of the shop, there have only been 14. They're referring to knives. The katanas are knives. They're Japanese knives. And this is like a knife shop. And, okay, so foreign, yeah, so they're saying they're just saying no foreign tourists, which is, I can totally get it. They said in here, they say, throughout the history of the store, they only had 14 broken ever. And then, the other by Japanese or residents. And then the other, they've had 42 broken by foreigners that are foreign tourists that went into the shop. So, is that racism or is it just the guy trying to take care of his product in the shop? This I've seen. I don't know where it's from, but I think I saw this in Chiba. But this is basically a outside of a buy me drinky club. And that's quite often what happens. I think the next one is too. This is the same one. Yeah. So, and I think I've seen that one too. And I think that's in Yokohama. But the thing here though is it's not uncommon for a foreigner, even a resident, to go in to a one of these clubs. They're ladies clubs basically, quite drunk and start touching the women and that kind of thing, and they don't like that. Or they get really frustrated because they can't touch the women and they start getting loud and obnoxious. And quite often this comes up. This is illegal, by the way. So this, I mean, you can hire an attorney and sue against just about every one of these because it is racial discrimination by the letter of the law. And then here's another one. And you can see there, it says fantasy omise. So that means it's probably like one of those clubs. So that's my take on it. Feel free, to comment. Please, let's do that. I mean, and start the forum on all of this, because I think that it's a good discussion that needs to be had. And let's start the discussion. And if anybody wants to like join me in the discussion online or in a live feed, please feel free to suggest that as well. I love company, and we don't have to talk about discrimination. If you have other ideas that you want me to cover about life in Japan, please bring it up. If you want me to share some pictures or things like that about Japanese nightlife or whatever the subject might be, please feel free to ping me, either in the comment section down there. There's a Twitter account also on the channel page. And thank you. Have a good day and a happy 2022.